you ever worry about like mental health issues as they grow older, because of their past and about their
Yeah.
parents maybe not wanting them or couldn't have them?
Mental health issues. I mean, we'll probably spend a lot of time in therapy. Let's be honest here. With that said, like I think that the one thing that worries me the most is going to be drug addiction. Like both of my kids have their families have histories of drug addiction, so I think I'm just going to be super open and honest with them about like, hey, like that's a dragon that you can't tickle. Like you can't go mess with that because that will destroy your life.
Yeah.
Because let's look at your parents. It destroyed their life. And so without being like too, I don't want to scare them into like, because I think that there are some parents that like try too hard and they scare their kids, or they get their kids curious about it, if that makes sense. Like they
That
start to
makes
think
a
like,
lot of
well, why is it so off limits?
Yeah.
But I think that I want to instill in them a very healthy respect for it. Hey, if you ever want to, if you ever even think about it, come talk to me. We'll talk through it. I'll help you understand why this is a bad thing. But that's the thing that I think I worry most about my kids. And like I said, they're still real young. So I think that, yeah, addiction is something that we're going to have very open, frank conversations about, just because of the nature of their parents and kind of their family background.
right.
Which, like, that's the reason I don't drink, is like my family, both sides of my family have histories of alcoholism. Not like alcoholics, like ruined their life, drank themselves under the table, but like both of my grandparents, both my grandpas, like drank a lot and drank very heavily in their youth. And so I've just been like, no, I don't want to mess with that. So I've just made a decision to not drink. And that's been good for me in a lot of ways, because I don't have to worry about that particular demon, if that makes sense.
No, it makes
That makes a lot of
total
sense.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah, Jack and
absolutely.
I both
Yeah.
have experience with family members who are alcoholics. But we had a previous conversation on this podcast before about our own relationship with alcohol, and I guess, like a generation removed, when you grow up around it, like you learn what not to do.
Sure.
So there is that aspect of it, as well as like it doesn't necessarily have to be passed over, because Jack and I both drink, but we both definitely feel like it's not a real issue in our life. It's never ruined anything in our lives. And I mean, when we're
Sure.
young and dumb, sure, but that's more
Sure.
just being young and dumb. But like now, like, and I think Jack was the one who said it on that when we were talking about, is like, if it ever gets to the point where it's making me a worse father or taking away from my kid or putting my kid in harm or jeopardy, like then you have to like have that conversation with yourself.
Yeah, you got to check yourself and
Yeah.
figure that shit out real quick.
Yeah.
Well, I was like 20 when I asked my granddad. I was like, because when I was a kid, like I heard that my granddad drank. As a grown, as I grew up, I never saw him drink, if that makes sense. So like I asked him one time, I was like 19, and I was like, hey, like I've never seen you take a drink, but I've heard that you were a prolific drinker. Like what happened? And he's like, well, I drank because I had a hole in my heart, and when I met your grandma, I didn't have that hole, and she filled that hole, and so I didn't need to drink anymore. And I was like, all right, that's cute. And then I asked him again, like 2 years later. I was like, hey, like what? Like, no, but like really, like what? And he's like, because I could never just have a drink. I had to have a drink and 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 a drink until I couldn't drink anymore. And I decided that that wasn't good for me. And I was like, that makes a lot more sense. And that, like, the amount of self control that he had to do that and just like cut himself off was like, that's hardcore. And I really respected him for that. But like, I think that, yeah, that was something that I never wanted to even mess with. And I think that, yeah, like you said, just you can make the choice to stop that particular like trait with you and make that choice. I think that's a solid thing to do. I think that's something everybody has to do. You look at your own family, even if you've got a great family like life growing up, there's always something that you can change in your own family moving forward.
Right. And my dad was the same way. My dad would have a drink with his buddies at noon and close down the
Sure.
bars at 3 in the morning. He said if he had one,
Yikes.
he would have to close down the bars. And that's kind of why he stopped. When he stopped when he had my brother, my oldest brother.
Sure.
So, yeah, he was the same way. Couldn't just have one. Had to have as many as he could until he passed out.
And my dad was the opposite, where, well, not the complete opposite. He just hit that fork in the road and he went the other direction. So he was an alcoholic and he was drinking, but he didn't make the choice to turn it around. And so yeah, that comes with its own baggage as well. I mean, I don't do therapy, but I've definitely dealt with my demons over the last, even just this last decade. And uh, the biggest thing for me is actually having my daughter. It's kind of trippy, like to bring it full circle to know that, because Jack's father is my uncle. We're cousins. And
Okay.
yeah, so I know his uncle very well. He's one of the best men I know. He's a phenomenal dad, phenomenal human being, great. And people would say the same thing about my dad. Everybody loves my dad too, and except for his actual family. Um, oh, he's so smart and this and that and the other. There's a long list of things you could say positively about him, but the I don't think he ever contemplated or cared the effect that his alcoholism had on his own kids. And it was tumultuous, especially through the 20s, man, just dealing with a lot of demons that you don't, when you're going through it, you don't actually understand what it is. I couldn't say this is because of my dad. It's only when you get to a
Sure.
certain point and you turn back around and you look at it. And really now having my daughter, I'm just like, it just blows my mind. Like everything comes a little more black and white since I've had my daughter, where I'm like, I would never do that. Like I would never do that. I wouldn't do that. I want to do that. And all of a sudden things kind of clear up. And honestly, that's the best therapy anyone could ask for, is like, I had my daughter and so many things became clear to me. Like I have a really bad temper, or I had, and I battle with that a lot. And so, and I know that, and I shoulder that temper. And not that my dad had a temper, but I think it was a reaction to his passiveness,
Yeah.
because my dad would just like pass out on the floor. And
Well,
I
and I
think your
think that
dad
it's
is the opposite of having a temper.
yeah, exactly.
I've
Yeah.
never seen his dad raise his voice or do anything, but every time I see him, he has a beer in his hand.
Yeah. So it sounds
nice.
like a good thing, but like I think in a reaction to that, I went the opposite way, because I'm like, I don't want to be like you. I'm gonna go the complete opposite way. But that had its own bag of tricks to it.
Sure.
And
Well, I think
yeah,
it's somebody one time was like, go like, and you can do this in any relationship. You can do this with an employment relationship. You can do this as a family relationship. Like if you have something that you want to be or something that you want to do, go like and you have a bad experience with that. It's like with a parent, whether it's an employer or whatever. You just go make a list of all the stuff that you're not going to do when you're in that position. So like you can say, these are the things that my dad did to me. I'm never going to do these things. And that way you have like a hard backstop on like things that you're not going to do. And you can do the same thing like with your employer or whatever. When I'm a manager, I'm never going to X, Y, or Z. And you can do that kind of same exercise with really any I watch my parents do whatever, so I'm not going to do X, Y, or Z. My dad was X kind of husband. I'm never going to do X, Y, or Z. And you can go through and you can kind of make that list of nevers, and that kind of gives you a firm backstop to say, I'm never going to yell at my wife. I'm never going to leave the house mad. Whatever it is. But that gives you kind of guidance on where you want to go with your relationship and where you want to go kind of longer term. It gives you that kind of vision board moving forward.
and I'm dealing with both those things right now. I'm not yelling at my wife and not leaving the house angry.